How long have you been practicing law?
What time is it?
It's 12:22 a.m.
About 7 hours.
The whole gang's back together, and with some new faces. Daredevil Born Again sees the return of beloved characters like Foggy Nelson. Oh no. Okay, well, Ben Point. Oh god, is he okay? Frank? What happened? Karen? Lalo Salamanca's in this now? The first season of Daredevil Born Again has officially concluded, and these 9 episodes bring the long-awaited return of the established Netflix characters from a darker pocket of Marvel television. And despite the show mostly winning me over by the end, I can't help but feel this series was having an identity crisis throughout. Maybe there was just too much pressure trying to fit this show into the wider scope of the MCU, but I will say, credit where credit's due, the reboot has shown a massive respect to the original 3 seasons of Daredevil and those characters. It doesn't disparage what came before it, but on the other hand, does this new incarnation of the show feel like Season 4, or is this just some bizarre Disney hybrid masquerading as the Daredevil show we know and love? It's crazy to think how 10 years have passed since the first season of Daredevil originally premiered on Netflix, and I feel this show set the bar pretty high for what to expect when it comes to a gritty and layered superhero story. Lawyer by day, Daredevil by night. It sounds like a generic double-life scenario, but the depth to these characters and how such nuance is explored really helped define the show. And Daredevil as a series really took itself seriously. This tone did remain consistent for the most part, centered around the conflict between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, and luckily this conflict does make a return, becoming the beating heart behind Born Again. I've said it before on the channel, but some projects that Disney gets their hands on are often ruined by forced, generic humour that just feels out of place. Sure, the Netflix run had humour, but it was organic and character-driven. It wasn't out of place and forced specifically for the cameras, like we have seen countless times throughout the MCU. But luckily, Born Again seems to understand this idea for the most part, being extremely patient with its overarching story. And it was great to see Vincent D'Onofrio back as Wilson Fisk, running for mayor of New York City, and his past as Kingpin is something that he is trying to keep out of the public eye. And with this, his wife Vanessa still remains a huge influence over his actions, which becomes more relevant as this reboot continues. For Matt Murdock, on the other hand, his world is completely shaken by an event I did not expect to be in the very first episode, let alone within the first 15 minutes or so. Matt's best friend and partner-in-law, Foggy Nelson, is murdered, which is meant to be the hook for the reboot. And for a character we spent years appreciating, I really didn't like how sudden this was. I'd heard the rumours about this being an important part of the show, but it felt more like a statement to deliberately make a ballsy move, and it felt as though the folks behind the reboot were trying to define the show before it had even had chance to define itself. And this is where the familiar dynamic of Matt, Foggy, and Karen Page is removed from the equation, and instead we settle for a new law firm with some episodes feeling like a case of the week type ordeal. It's different, but we do get used to it. After Foggy's death, Matt is no longer Daredevil. Instead, others have taken to the streets as vigilantes inspired by his work. And in a city now controlled by Mayor Fisk and the crooked cops, who's going to stand up for the little man? I feel a good majority of this show deals with Matt's difficulty in letting go of Daredevil, matched with Fisk's rise to power over New York City, but ultimately by the end, they are both seduced by their darker halves, and whether this is to try and do good, or for power and personal gain, these two just cannot deny who they really are. And despite wanting to constantly compare the reboot to what came before it, I will admit there's some excellent storytelling to appreciate from this new angle. And I really like how superheroes are still referred to as vigilantes, and how their costumes are seen as immediate defiance against the city. And one storyline in particular that I really enjoyed introduces White Tiger. Hector Ayala is a family man trying to do good by the city, and when he defends the wrong person trying to be the hero, he's on trial for supposedly murdering an undercover police officer. And it was interesting to see Matt use his so-called powers to choose this case and and defend Hector against the crooked police who suddenly follow Frank Castle, the Punisher, as some kind of personal totem of retribution. There are many scenes where Matt gives into temptation using his heightened senses just like he would if he was still Daredevil, and it feels like a slippery slope leading to the inevitable where he will embrace his alter ego once again. Even the weaker episodes of this reboot had their moments of character building that ultimately feel more gratifying overall. The bank robbery episode is arguably generic filler, but I enjoyed it because it showed Matt Murdock putting himself in a dangerous Daredevil situation. But he couldn't embrace the devil, he had to be sneaky and tactical about how he foiled this robbery as Matt Murdock, and it shows how he hungers to do more beyond just being a lawyer. And it's unfortunate how these moments are, in my opinion, ruined by forced acknowledgements of the wider MCU and its characters. I haven't seen the Ms. Marvel TV show, but I didn't expect a pop vinyl doll of her to be dangled in front of a blind man like some kind of cruel product placement.
Right here, a custom-designed Funko in her honor. Oh yeah, well, you can't see.
I'd arguably say this is where Born Again struggles with its identity because it wants to be a well-written successor and embrace the dark depths of the original show, but it has to force these overbearing reminders that we're now part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's like breaking the fourth wall with awkward commercials that are supposed to feel subtle, but are instead the complete opposite and just take you out of the story. I get a similar feeling when Born Again tries to embrace its darker impulses, and it's like the show is trying to capture the magic behind the brutality of the Netflix series, and certain scenes feel like deliberate setup for something violent that's reminiscent of the original. The cinematography improves to capture these moments, only to then return to basic form. That's not to say these moments aren't well done, because they are. There's some fantastic fight choreography to appreciate, and a scene that really did surprise me in the finale features a man's head being crushed by Wilson Fisk. Annoyingly, the YouTube censors won't let me show that scene, but it made for some great usage of practical effects, and I did like how the show did attempt to make more mature scenes feel more gritty. Sticking with the darker themes, I loved the live-action portrayal of the serial killer character Muse. From the costume to the actor just being a confused kid making art out of people's blood, just a crazy part of the series that I did not expect to carry so much weight behind it. I'd arguably say this is one of the defining moments that forces Matt to become the Daredevil once again, in order to save a little girl from becoming Muse's next painting. Plus, it's interesting how this seemingly irrelevant character caused an unintentional rift between Matt and his new love interest, Dr. Heather Glenn, and she's a therapist who almost becomes a victim of Muse, and I'll be honest, I really didn't like her character all that much. I found her writing, especially when around Matt, to be super one-dimensional. She exists just to be a conflict of interest, where she happens to be Wilson Fisk's a marriage counselor, and this naturally causes trouble between her and Matt for obvious reasons. One character that I was so glad to see make a return was Ben Poindexter, aka Bullseye. The performance from Wilson Bethel throughout Season 3 was just mind-blowing and solidified that run of episodes as my personal favourite, and his portrayal in the new show is just as raw and gripping. He's responsible for killing Foggy Nelson, ends up in prison but escapes towards the end of this show. And that sequence, launching a tooth through a cop's face, was just masterfully done. Easily one of the best moments from the reboot, and even with such minimal screen time, he made a lasting impression, and I think it is disappointing how certain characters are criminally underused in this reboot. But it does leave you wanting more, like with the Punisher for example. Great to see his return, and I do believe he's getting a one-off TV special scheduled for next year. There's a lot to appreciate about the show's ending. The build-up of Mayor Fisk's corrupt office across the previous 8 episodes culminates in implementing martial law over New York City, and Fisk's task force is a success, capturing all known vigilantes and literally imprisoning them in cages. And I like how Vanessa was revealed to be the big bad this season, responsible for getting Foggy killed and running an import-free criminal empire, making millions of dollars trading art using a tax-exempt transport in New York, and her goals align with that of the Kingpin. They both desire power and wealth, and by the end, they have exactly that, but Matt Murdock won't allow this to happen at the expense of New York City. I really enjoyed the ending monologue and how that sequence utilized the Radiohead track, Everything in Its Right Place from the album Kid A. Overall, a great scene that really elevated the finale for me personally, and I felt set the tone for what to expect in Season 2. This leaves us on a bit of a cliffhanger about assembling an army. I'm guessing this hints at bringing back the Defenders. I was never really invested in any of the other Netflix shows besides Daredevil. I couldn't get into Jessica Jones. I'd heard terrible things about both Luke Cage and Iron Fist. I don't know, let me know in the comments, are these shows actually worth watching? I know many would love to see Spider-Man make an appearance in a future Daredevil project, but I think the character's rights being held by Sony make that very unlikely and more problematic. Likewise with Kingpin only being used in TV projects for similar reasons and not movies. Oh man, these restrictions are just so frustrating. Behind the scenes, I was surprised to learn that the original rendition of Born Again was scrapped during the initial production. Yeah, apparently Marvel looked at the early cuts and basically said, this isn't working, and started from scratch. Directors fired, writers replaced, turning Born Again into Start Again. And Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio spoke out about the previous story idea and tried to remain modest, saying it was a good idea that sadly didn't work for them. I think in all honesty that's just a polite way of saying it was shit and most likely just didn't embrace the mature essence of the original show. I will say it is a good thing that this blunder, for lack of a better word, was recognised early, therefore ensuring the original show's legacy was not tarnished by a mediocre continuation. But that production shift in my eyes does bleed into the final product. You can tell this show was pulled in different directions, therefore causing an identity crisis. There's a lot going on, trying to honour the past, appeal to new fans, whilst also existing within Marvel's interconnected story. That's a lot for one show to handle. Overall, I will say if you did enjoy the original series, there is some content to appreciate from Born Again, but it is a weaker show in comparison. It does have potential, and a lot of the series in my eyes felt like setup for Season 2, which is currently being filmed, for release sometime in 2026, and hopefully the next run of episodes will flourish in comparison. Who knows, maybe we'll get even more Daredevil content beyond this initial 2-season order. Anyway, if you enjoyed this review, please do leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments, how did you feel about Daredevil Born Again? Are you excited for the upcoming Season 2? As always, I love hearing your thoughts and opinions, and for more content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?